So this panel are going to be three wonderful people, and they are the helpers who are helping all of us helpers with the things that we forget. These are the things that we have not thought about, the things we did not learn about in our training program or in graduate schools, and I am so grateful the three of them exist, and they're going to share their information and their wisdom with us today, and hopefully we'll learn some things. I know that I will, because I have no clue what 2ADE is, so I'm excited to find out. So I would love to invite to the stage these three wonderful people. We have Corinne Celko, who is the attorney and managing stakeholder at Emerge Law Group. We have Britt Rollins, who is the co-founder and CEO of the National Psychedelics Association. And we have Dean Guske, who is a CPA and the managing director at Guske and Company. Welcome to the stage. And first, we are going to hear from Corinne.
Great, thanks, Emma. Hi, I'm Corinne Celko. First, I just want to say what a pleasure it is to be with you here today. I'd like to say thank you to Kevin Boktic and Horizons for giving me this opportunity to speak with you. As Emma mentioned, I'm the managing shareholder of Emerge Law Group. We are a full-service business firm headquartered here in Portland, and we specialize in the cannabis and psychedelics industry. We have a special and unique perspective on that because our lawyers helped to draft the measure to legalize cannabis here in Oregon, and we also wrote Measure 109, which legalized psilocybin services here in Oregon. So we have been working with a number of clients in this space. You know, you've come to probably the most dry and boring section of the conference today, and it's tough. We're often seen as sort of, raining on the parade of this really, really exciting industry. But we really are here to collaborate and partner with you. One of the reasons why Emerge Law Group came into existence is because, for example, I was at a big law firm, international AmLaw 100 law firm, and when cannabis was talked about legalization, I had approached the business folks at the law firm and asked if we could represent cannabis clients, and the answer was no. That law firm prohibited all their lawyers from representing clients in the cannabis industry. So I left and joined Emerge Law Group, which was in its infancy. And we are lawyers who believe that folks in the cannabis and psychedelics industries need excellent legal services, just like any other traditional industry. So we're here to serve you, and some of the areas that we're going to talk about today are things that we've talked with our clients, specifically risk mitigation, liability, and how you can have a successful operation that withstands the test of time.
Wonderful. Thank you, Corinne. Britt, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Britt Rollins, co-founder of the National Psychedelics Association. Our mission is to unite and support the licensees of state-regulated psilocybin-assisted care, or services as we're calling it. And what that means is we're really looking to provide the solutions and tools that are required to do the work that you're all doing so that more people can heal. And myself, I believe in this space. I come to this space because I received healing, and I accredit psychedelic-assisted care, underground care, with saving my life. For many years, I had seen my background is in pharmaceutical advertising, so like many of you, I'm in healthcare adjacent, or was, working on psychotropic medications, antipsychotics, SSRIs, benzos, and a 20-year career in advertising pharmaceuticals. The only thing I really learned was none of them would work for me, and I knew why. And that was a really existential crisis, to be able to push pills to doctors saying, these are gonna help. And knowing they do help some, but they didn't help me. And so my mission, and as coming out of that experience, my first psychedelic experience in 2018, was really to help support and make sure that these are much more accessible, because this is a modality and these are modalities that really should be offered to more people, to help more people, because a lot of the tools we have now just don't work. So the National Psychedelics Association really wants to see this be successful and support all of you to make it so.
Wonderful. Thank you, Britt. Dean, tell us a little about what you do.
All right, my name is Dean Guske. I am a CPA. I have a practice in the greater Seattle area. And I would say I'm here to talk about taxes, obviously. It's a real hit at parties, let me tell you. The reason I'm here is to talk about a specific provision in the Internal Revenue Code, which we'll get into. And my expertise in that area has been through cannabis, which we have a very large practice in the cannabis space, probably for the last 10, 11, 12 years. I didn't have to ask my law firm because I own the firm. And so I decided to get into it, really kind of on accident. And I found it kind of pretty fascinating just from a nerdy tax perspective. And it has allowed me to kind of meet probably some of the most interesting people I've ever met in my life. And now getting into this space, into this community, some even more interesting people. So it's been good. Been good.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dean.
Thanks.
So, Dean, I want to start with you.
Okay.
We've heard about 280E a few times on stage today, and I know personally I have no clue what that means. So if you could help illuminate us, that would be great.
Sure. First of all, don't be afraid of taxes. Don't be afraid of the IRS. Don't be afraid of the Department of Revenue in Oregon. Do find a good CPA, good attorney, other professionals to kind of help you run your business. So 280E is just the title name of a provision in the Internal Revenue Code that says if you are in the trade or business of trafficking in a Schedule I or Schedule II drug under the Controlled Substances Act, then you are allowed no deductions against your ordinary income. What it doesn't say is that you are actually allowed an adjustment for your cost of goods sold. And, you know, in that, you know, trafficking is defined elsewhere as regularly buying and selling a controlled substance under Schedule I or Schedule II. And so that's all it says. Now, in the cannabis space, and I'll just kind of use that as reference because that's where kind of my background comes from, you know, are you buying or selling? Pretty much everybody is buying and selling. In this space, you may or may not be actually trafficking, and you might have some opportunities to arrange your business in a way where you can kind of put the trafficking piece in an entity or so that you don't affect the other parts of your business. So for instance, a facilitator, if a facilitator is not buying and selling the psychedelics, then they're not trafficking, right? A service center may not be trafficking if they're just providing a space. The person who is actually selling the mushrooms or the psilocybin is trafficking. And so some of the things that we'll want to do is work with people like, how do you want to set up your business? You know, do you want it a little more complicated so you can save some money? So maybe you can, we were talking about prices earlier on, so that you can provide these services efficiently and in a price that, you know, maybe you want a broader community to be able to take advantage of what you're doing. So
am I understanding you right that, let's say that I wanted to start a service center and I wanted to have as little influence of 280E on my business, would it be wise to start two businesses and do a service center and then a little tiny one that just did the trafficking?
yes. So in my opinion, the answer to that would be yes. There's always a good answer, a better answer, and the best answer, right? And so in my opinion, I think the best answer is probably yes, start two businesses. One that just buys and sells the psilocybin to your customer, and another one that just provides the space, right? And then you may or may not have facilitators that, work for the service center. You may contract with them, those sorts of things. But yeah, I would say two businesses. You could do it in one business, okay? But I think you're running a little bit more of a risk just from a tax and accounting standpoint. And think about it. IRS comes knocking on your door, right? And they say, well, let me see your tax return. We want to make sure that you've prepared it correctly, you've filed it correctly, and paid all your taxes, right? And they say, well, wait a minute, you're selling a Schedule I drug here. And you go, yeah, but we really have two lines of business. Well, that's when you can kind of get yourself into having to explain how your business actually works. They may not understand it. And if you have those things separated, then you might get one of your tax returns audited and not necessarily the other one at the same time. So I like to just sort of have this sitting over here. We're fine. We are selling drugs. We admit it. Here's our taxes. Off you go. And then you have this other business here that's really what the business is. From my mind, is providing the service center or, providing the facilitation.
Yeah.
So,
And I think one thing to add to that, though, one thing to consider when you're setting up your business and talking to your accountants and lawyers is the separation will add additional expense, right? You're dealing with two additional businesses. However, that also may help you, though, for a little bit more cost. You may be able to set up entirely, basically different banks, different, payment providers or point of sale providers, merchant services, what have you. And yes, you'll be doubling the cost, but there's also the opportunity to have these very delineated businesses. And those are all the decisions you need to talk through, I think, when you're working out your business plan. What seems like an extra cost may be minimal compared to the issues you run into when it comes tax time. And
that's right.
We have to you really want to consider those things. It's not like one is good or bad. It's that each of these have implications that will affect your future business, and they need to be considered and not unlightly.
Yeah, the cost and the headache is almost always going to be less than the tax.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and that's the thing. At the moment, it doesn't feel that way, though, right? When you're hearing the cost of these and all of these things that go into creating two EINs, I think sometimes it seems scary, but think about the long-term implications. Like that may help you longer term, even though in the moment it feels like it's a big expense. Because there's a lot of expenses right now. I mean, everybody who's doing this is taking on quite a bit of expenses to start these up. It's the first time it's been done. So
That's right. That's right. And run your business. I have an attorney. I mean, I write him checks. And let Backburner Bob handle the taxes and the accounting and all those sorts of things and go out and run your business. It shouldn't really affect how you do it. It's maybe a little bit of a headache and might add a little annoying cost to it, but I think at the end of the day, some of the downsides that I've seen in the cannabis industry where I've picked up clients where they're in trouble, and the last thing you want to do is, have tax problems follow you around as an individual. It's stressful, and it costs a lot of money.
I'll also add that OHA does allow this kind of two business kind of model. OHA allows co-licensees, so where two corporate entities can be co-licensees together on one license. And so specifically with the service center model, which is where primarily the service center is providing services, right? Not goods, which Dean mentioned. There's a way to get essentially deduction for cost of goods sold, but with the service center, there's really no goods, it's services. And so that is where it can be helpful to have the model where you have one business that's trafficking and one business that is basically just renting space, renting rooms. And you can also have a space use agreement where another type of business, yoga studio, you can rent the space to them at periods when the space is not being used for administration sessions.
That's right. That's right.
So there's some questions from the audience along this topic, so I want to just weave these in as we're talking about this. Around the two businesses, someone is wondering if you grow mushrooms and give them to the clients for free, is that still trafficking?
Of course it is.
Okay. So still two businesses on that one.
I would do it,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure.
And you can't give them for free.
Yeah, I think that's against the rules. I mean, so it needs to be paid for.
Okay. And then 280E, this person has heard that the IRS always audits 280E entities. Is that true?
That's not true. I have probably prepared more than 10,000 tax returns that include 280E, and I've had less than 10 of them audited. Knock on wood. I haven't had any changes to any of them either, but it's not that's not the case. Early on in Colorado, which with Washington was the first state that had adult use cannabis, they did audit quite a few of them. And I think they were just sort of doing a test, and Colorado was unfortunately the testing ground for that kind of stuff. And so there were some nightmares kind of in that. And when they get in, they're not only looking at their books. Cannabis, it's a cash business. I'm assuming that this is going to be a cash business for a while until we'll talk about some banking, I think, in there. There's also instances where they did, looked at all their banking activity and all the cash that the cannabis businesses were receiving, and there's a lot of compliance around cash. And so, outside of Colorado, I would say probably not. Okay. Not every business.
So I want to transition us a little bit and talk about insurance.
Yeah.
And liability and that whole world. Talk to us about options that we have now, spaces that are lacking, like the gaps that we have, and what we can possibly expect moving forward.
Sure. I think the first question there is, do you need insurance? I would argue that you do. Most businesses, they have, general commercial liability. There's premises for the premises in case someone trips and falls on the premises, things like that. And then I think the next question, once you get past that and you decide, yes, I do need some sort of insurance. Again, this is coming from the perspective of we want you to be successful long-term businesses. And if you think about, one unfortunate event that can happen that can wipe out your business without insurance, that's generally where we're looking at. So then I think the next question is, what type of insurance do I need? And when we're mentioning things like general commercial liability, directors and officers, insurance, workers' comp, things like that, you might decide you need those. And I think that generally that hasn't been too hard to find. The area that has been the most hard to find, and that unfortunately seems to be the area of the biggest need, is errors and omissions policies or professional liability. And that is usually for facilitators and for service centers. That's where someone might sue you for some sort of malpractice or for some harm that you've caused them. We have heard of one insurance company that has mentioned that they would be willing to offer that kind of errors and omissions or professional liability insurance, but that's it. That's the only one that I've heard of. I'm not sure if either of you have heard of more.
No, there's a lack of insurance options specifically in professional liability, and I think what everyone needs to know, yes, it is needed, but you should also be asked, what am I covered for? and what might be excluded. I think that sometimes in a rush to build a business, we want to check a box, and the best thing going is whatever's available, and that may be it, but you're also paying a lot of money for something that might not actually withstand a claim, so it's good to ask the questions. And again, I think that when it comes to insurance, there are products in cannabis, and those are starting to port over, and we're starting to see, like, this, at least for some of these types of insurance, to come over into this market. But again, you need the insurance, so I would never say you shouldn't, because it leaves you open in so many ways. And at the same time, really ask the questions, like, what is in this? What will get my claim denied? What would allow me to there's so many issues of policies being written where things like mushrooms are excluded from the actual policy. And so therefore you paid $12,000 a year for a piece of paper that means nothing, right? Because that's what you're doing. You're dealing in mushrooms. And so I would just really ask about the claims and about the exclusions, and really trying to understand, is this going to work? And maybe it will for right now, but long term, there's just not a lot of great options.
Agreed. The one other thing I'd add to Britt's comments is that specifically as a facilitator, if as a facilitator you're an actual employee of a service center and the service center gets professional liability insurance, maybe you're covered. You should, of course, check the language. But if you are a facilitator and an independent contractor, that's when you really want to check. If the service center is saying, don't worry about it, we have professional liability insurance. With you as an independent contractor, you need to make sure that the policy for the service center, if that is covering things like independent contractors for you as a facilitator, or if it's only covering the service center itself. So I think that kind of goes to what Britt's talking about, is to be careful about what type of insurance you need, what is the actual language, what are the exclusions, and to make sure that you are protected.
Yeah.
Thank you. And a little bit of a bridge here with the last 280 question. We have a question from the audience members for people who are 1099, so they're a contractor and they own their own business for facilitation specifically. Are they subject to 280E?
Only if they're also selling psilocybin.
Okay.
In
Probably not.
my opinion, I think that would be, the answer would be no.
Okay. Britt, did you have something you wanted to say?
No, I was thinking along those lines, though. Yes, when you think about 280E, and we were talking earlier about bifurcating the businesses and things like that, the people that are going to be exposed usually are going to be the ones who are operating the psilocybin dispensing business under the two licenses.
That's right.
And we've seen that in the banking, to kind of pull in banking to this conversation as well, because that's a part of this, is that we are starting to see certain banking institutions really view this as the difference between cannabis and hemp, and the services being similar to hemp. And they feel much more comfortable playing in that space of services. But if you haven't really bifurcated your businesses, that becomes a little harder for their compliance to get over it. And so maybe some of the reasons that you want to do this are for 280E exposure, but it's also for the different services you might need as an organization, and whether or not you'll be able to get those because of the trafficking component sitting under the one EIN.
That's right.
That's helpful. And kind of continuing on thinking about licensing and banking and insurance and all of that, for people who have a DEA license and are also a psilocybin facilitator, what do they need to think about? What are the risks that are possibly involved, and what are some ways to mitigate that risk?
Go ahead.
I'll start, Britt, and then you can chime in. I think there are a couple of things to think about. One is certainly the risk that your DEA license is potentially in trouble for partaking in psilocybin services. OHA rules prohibit facilitators from essentially wearing two hats, right? So as a facilitator, you may also be a licensed therapist, you may also be a licensed medical provider, but when you are acting as a facilitator, you are supposed to be, only acting under that license as a facilitator, and not entering into using any of your other professional licenses. And I think it's important to track that and to really follow that. If you heard the previous panel with Seth Mayer, who was the, health and security officer for Intertrek, he touched on that, right? He is a licensed medical professional, medical doctor, but for the services that he's performing for Intertrek, he's not practicing medicine. But it's important to think about those lines and those boundaries and to operate your business in a way that rings true to those.
So when thinking about the fact that we don't really have good insurance options on board yet, how helpful are things like waivers and informed consent forms when protecting against possible lawsuits?
Huge, yes. We always recommend that the OHA required documentation is voluminous. So all of the paperwork that's required at the preparation session, it's a lot. And we recommend that for your protection, you add a few more. You add a release and a waiver of liability, and it could be for various things. So for example, for a service center, if you're doing the two business model that we talked about, so you're a service center and that line of business only rents rooms out to facilitators, you might want to have a release waiver of liability that a client signs that says, we're only renting the room. We are not providing you with the facilitation service or the administration session service. And likewise, if you're a facilitator, you might have, just like we previously talked about, with the different professional license, you might have a waiver or release of liability that says, client, you are informed and you agree that I am only acting as a facilitator. Again, I might have a license as a therapist, I might have a license as a medical doctor, but for purposes of this administration session and what I'm providing for you, you agree and acknowledge, I am only offering services as a facilitator. Those are the kind of waivers and releases that we think are important. And again, they're specific to you and your business and how it operates.
Thank you. That's really helpful. So my last question for each of you is, what haven't I asked you yet that I should be asking you?
Want to go first?
Sure.
So, we didn't get into banking as much as I think we should, but I think that those solutions are some of the easier to solve right now. But I think what folks should know is that you are assuming that you can get by using Stripe or a bank that doesn't know what you're doing is a big risk, and you should really find ways to be more transparent in working with your providers of any service like this, because the business disruption that may happen along the lines if you lose your bank account or if you're no longer allowed to process on debit cards or credit cards where you had been for a while will cause major disruptions. And again, these small fees that may seem insurmountable, those will go down over time as this industry matures. But for right now, paying those may seem exorbitant, and I get it, this is already costly, and it's all getting baked into the client costs, and that's not good for anybody. But what's also not good for anybody is everybody shuts down because they can't operate, and because we were short-sighted and we didn't want to pay these fees now where we could, and so we're stable in the long run. So I think that's an area that I just would like for people to be cognizant of. Is it seems like a lot, because it is, but it could be a lot worse if you don't have that transparency and buy into some of this.
Thank you, Britt.
I would say, again, kind of along those lines, don't take shortcuts, okay? You're running a business. That's the way the IRS is going to see it. That's the way a lot of other people in the community that you're going to be dealing with, banks and insurance companies, attorneys, et cetera, you are running a business, and this kind of stuff is, it's important. Just take the time to set it up correctly, find somebody who's a good CPA, find somebody who's a good attorney, find somebody else that does the things that you're not an expert in, right? And you'll find that if you do that up front and kind of follow that sort of guidance and have all the little administrative stuff that's taken care of, you're going to be so happy in the long run, and it's going to make your business operate less stressfully, fewer worries about some of these things that we're talking about. Sometimes it's there's things out there that, I don't know anything about this. Well, get somebody that helps you with it, right? So don't take shortcuts on that. Spend the time up front.
Yeah, I think along those same lines, I would say, what questions, haven't you asked? Ask everything. Ask us anything and everything up front. I think we've heard other speakers talk about the village, right? The village that it takes. And it takes a village to raise a child. And, that adage was, it's not just about childbearing, it's about community and shared effort for the best result. And I can tell you from a lawyer's perspective, I think sometimes clients don't want to ask us questions because they think we're going to give a negative answer. And really, we are just trying to point out risk. We are just trying to give you options so that depending on your appetite for risk, your funding, your method of operation, that your business can be as successful as it can be. So don't be afraid to ask. Ask it all and ask it early.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for sharing your wisdom with us. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.